Today, we're going to look at a different method of turning corn into bourbon without having to boil it. We have the cheat code. And no, it's not sugar. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse, this is Still It, and I have, in the past, made corn spirits the traditional way, like this, and they turned out great. They're awesome, but they are a fair bit of work. So today, I thought I'd use a cheat code that is going to make the process a whole lot easier, but the big question is it still going to taste the same? And if it's not the same, is it still going to taste good? I don't know the answer to that. I guess we need to find out together. So first up, the grain bill, the grist, the recipe for the grains that we're going to put into this stuff. And I'm going to keep it relatively traditional to start with, because we're trying to make a bourbon here, which of course means corn. Now I'm going to be using a total of 18 kilograms of grain. That's this in freedom units. The whole recipe will be down in the description as well for you guys. I want to use 68% corn, so that works out at right around 12 kilograms. Now traditionally, if you're making a bourbon, you would use barley for the enzymes to convert the starches to sugar in the mash. We're not going to need those enzymes today, but I am going to add barley in, once again, just to kind of keep the flavor profile somewhat traditional. I'm using ale malts today. And this is going to come in slightly high on the weight side, but we're using 28% or 5 kilograms. And of course, because this is me and it's still it, I've got to throw a little bit of something in there. So we're going to use 1 kilogram of a medium crystal malt as well. I'm just trying to crowbar in a little bit of extra complexity, a little bit of caramelly sweetness on the finish. That's what I'm hoping for. Now, all of these grains need to be cracked or milled. I'm using a little 2-roller mill, and fair warning, guys, putting cracked corn through a mill can be pretty... It's tough on the rollers, and it can be hard to get through the mill as well. So a couple of little tips. Number one, start with cracked corn, not whole corn. Good luck to you, unless you have a Corona mill or something like that, or a hammer mill. Start with the rollers as far apart as possible on the first pass, and mix the corn in with the barley. This will help pull it through the rollers and keep things moving. And you're going to want to do 2, maybe even 3 passes through the mill, and each time you pass it through, move the rollers slightly closer together. When you're finished, it's going to look a little something like this. Normally, if we were making a standard bourbon recipe, at this point in time, we'd have to keep the barley and the corn separate. We don't have to do that because we have the cheat code, but I think it's kind of important to understand why we would do that, so you can understand why the cheat code is a cheat code. Think of it this way. This piece of bunched up rope is our starch molecule. And this, nom 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 nom, is our yeasties. And they can't eat this. It's too big. They can't get to it. They can't chomp it. Doesn't work. Now, this is our enzymes. And once again, this can't get to it. There's no way that it can get in there and cut it up. Boiling or gelatinizing the starch relaxes it and brings it out into this dirty, great, big, long chain. And now our enzymes can get in there and cut off little glucose molecules that our yeast can come along and eat. And alcohol and CO2. But we have the cheat code, so we don't need to boil the corn. Enough beating around the bush. It is time to reveal the cheat code finally. This stuff. This is Angel Yellow Label yeast, and what it essentially means is if you're a brewer or a distiller that's been doing all grain, you can forget everything you know about gelatinization and mashes. Before I go any further, I should probably say a huge thank you to Angel Yeast for sponsoring this video and for sending me the yeast. I thoroughly appreciate it. I've been using their products a bunch lately, mostly this, the M1, the AG2, and I'm going to start playing with the red label as well. But if you want more information on their products, you can go to the link in the description down below. And if you happen to be in New Zealand, watch this space. I've got a reveal coming up soon. But how the heck is this stuff a cheat code? Essentially, you can just take a starch source, throw it into water with a bit of this stuff. You don't have to worry about gelatinization. You don't have to worry about mashing. It is absolute freaking alchemy. It will just ferment. How bonkers is that? So it's going to ferment, which means we can distill it We can make bourbon, but what's it going to taste like? First up, start with boiling water. I'm using 75 litres, once again this, in gallons. Put that into the fermenter and slowly start adding your starch sauce, which for us is the corn and the barley, in while giving it a really good mix. Honestly, you don't even need to use boiling water. You can just use cold water if you want. I think you get slightly better conversion starting with hot water, and it's a small hedge against any of the micro, yeast and fungus and bacteria that is in the grain. And it's relatively easy to do if you've got distilling gear around, so I do it. Now it's just a case of letting that fermenter cool back down to about 30 degrees. When you're getting close, you can start rehydrating the yellow yeast that you're going to use. So pitching rates for this is around about 0.4% of the starch that you use. So for me, in this batch, it was 70 grams. Once again, sorry guys, this in ounces. And you're going to want to rehydrate it in about 5 to 10 times that amount of water at about 35 degrees Celsius. Once the yeast has rehydrated and the fermenter is down to 30 degrees Celsius, you can pitch the yeast on in, give it a little stir if you like. Honestly, you probably don't need it, and you're done. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's all she wrote. It's going to ferment. Crazy, I know. Now this will ferment a little bit different to other fermentations you're probably used to. It's going to take off pretty quickly, like normal. This was mine after 30 hours. You can see it's absolutely humming, all of the grains floating up and creating a grain cap. But the thing that's different about this is after about 4 days, it's probably going to taper off down to very little activity, but it'll probably keep ticking away for anywhere between another 5 to 10 days. You stop seeing fizzing and bubbling, it's ready for distillation. If you don't have the ability to distill on grain, that's fine. Just skim as much of the liquid off the top of the fermenter as you can. And if you want to bump up the volume of stuff you can actually distill, you can strain out the grain because it's like a sponge. It's got a lot of liquid in it. So you can strain it with a brew in a bag, a pillowcase, anything like that will work. It's just a little bit of work. I have been using this fruit press lately, and it's absolutely amazing in conjunction with a brew in a bag. I am able to distill on grain kind of with this thing. I don't want to push it too far. So what I tend to do is strain out half of the grain, put the liquid in, and just feed the grain to the chooks, and then put about half of the grain into the still as well. Now it's time to run stripping runs. These are distillation runs that cut down the volume of the wash we have. We're getting rid of as much water as we can and cutting the volume down. So I'm not worried about making cuts. I'm not worried about the speed that I'm running the still at, and I collect everything coming off the still. The stuff that comes off the still in those stripping runs is called low wines. And to empty the fermenter out for me on this run, I needed to run 2 of them. So now everything that was in the fermenter has been run through the still once, or some of the grains have been fed to the chooks. And it is time to perform our spirit run. So all of the low wines that we collected before go back into the still, and this time I will definitely be performing cuts, and I'll be running the still a little bit lower. Now you can see that the still has 2 sight glasses on it, but I do not have any plates in the still. I'm running this thing purely as a simple pot still. I used rolling cuts at the beginning to find my cut point from heads to hearts, and then started collecting straight into a larger vessel just because it's easier and I've got a relatively good idea of when I'm going to make cuts now. If you're new to this or you're not sure of cuts, by all means just continue collecting into small jars so you can taste them at your leisure, not off the still as it's happening. So for me, this run I took about 100 mils of 4 shots. Use that for firelighter or weed killer or whatever you want to use it for. And then I took another 750 mils of heads before switching over to hearts. So then I just kept running the still down to about 55% ABV. When I started to get little hints of maybe we're about to start finding tails, at which point I switched back over to rolling cuts to find my exact cut point. All of the keepers, all of the hearts that I decided to keep went into a big pot, and I used a calculator, there's a link down there if you want to use it, to figure out exactly how much water I needed to proof this all back down to 55% ABV. So this recipe produced 6 litres of whiskey. That's these 3 jars here, and I've treated each of these jars slightly different with oak. All of them have the Chase the Craft maturation sticks in them, and all of the oak was toasted for, what was it? 280 degrees Fahrenheit or 140 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. This has a level 2 char, a level 3 char, and this is exactly the same, but there's just 2 staves in there. I wanted to age it a little bit quicker. So I'm going to taste these and tell you if it is in fact similar to other bourbons I've made in the past. But first I need to say a huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, Patreons. I don't know what to say, man. I say it every video, but thank you. I thoroughly appreciate it. And there'll be some more posts going up about this and the other stuff that goes along with it on Patreon very soon. This isn't technically available yet. It will be soon, okay? All right, let's get stuck into this. So, got to taste this one first, right? Straight away, there is one big difference, and I'm going to talk about the difference later on because I think it's more important to talk about, definitely a difference. More important to talk about the similarities first. Corn, as expected. Nice mouthfeel, a little bit of oiliness. Definitely getting some really fun oak flavors coming through. That's awesome. And it is very similar to that, except this has a lighter char. So, you know, adjusting for that, I think they're pretty similar. All of that to say, yes, we have 100% created something that tastes like bourbon without having to mash or boil. But there is one big difference. And that is there's an additional aroma and a flavor compared to pretty much any other bourbon I've ever tasted. And that is, how do I put this? It's definitely a fermentation-based thing, I think. And the best way I think I can describe it is that it's kind of wine-like. It's white wine-like. But more, halfway between white wine and sake. That kind of flavor in there as well. And I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm not going to say it's good. It's different. Very, very different. If you want 100% traditional tasting bourbon, I don't think this is the way to go. You're going to have to do the hard yards and deal with corn the way you normally need to deal with corn. But if you're happy to experiment and to make something that is bourbon, but with an extra layer of something that stands out and is different, I think I could get down with this. I could really get down with this. This is fun. If you've tried this at home, please tell us about it in the comments. Tell us your results. Tell us what you think. Very, very interested to hear all of that. And do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, so on and so forth. I will catch you next time, guys. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.